The Nightly Business Report with Paul Kangas in Miami and Cassie Seifert in New York.
Good evening. Coming up on NBR, Congress began writing its own prescription for health care reform today, and the final bill is expected to show little resemblance to President Clinton's plan.
Profit-taking and weak bond prices took a modest toll on stocks today as the Dow Jones Industrial Average ended with a loss of 4.5 points.
NBR is made possible by Digital, an information technology company putting imagination to work. Franklin and Templeton Worldwide form the more than $110 billion Franklin Templeton Group, a global alliance of mutual funds and investment products distributed by investment professionals. A.G. Edwards, member of the New York Stock Exchange, serving the investment needs of individuals and businesses through more than 400 offices nationwide. And is produced in association with Reuters, the world's largest electronic publisher, which provides NBR with news, market data, and communication services worldwide.
Congress held the first official session on drafting a health care reform plan today. The long legislative journey began with the House Ways and Means Subcommittee meeting to consider a new bill to expand Medicare to cover people who do not have insurance. And the plan could be paid for with a new payroll tax on employers. Darren Gersh reports.
The new bill was written by Ways and Means Health Subcommittee Chairman Pete Stark. It drops much of the 1,300-page Clinton plan, but Stark says his bill meets the president's challenge to pass comprehensive health care reform.
The plan achieves the president's objectives, but without disrupting the good relationships that most Americans have with their doctors and without creating any new bureaucracies.
The giant insurance-buying health alliances of the Clinton plan are gone, replaced with a more voluntary approach. Employers would still have to pay at least 80% of the cost of a basic benefits package for their workers, but small businesses with fewer than 100 employees would not have to pay until 1997. Small businesses could buy private insurance or buy into an expanded Medicare program, which would cover the poor and those without private insurance. To help pay for the plan, employers could be hit with a 0.8% payroll tax, which would bring in $24 billion a year. Even Stark admits his bill is a tough sell.
Perhaps the best thing I can say about this bill is it'll give everyone something to complain about.
The subcommittee is expected to continue its work for at least another 2 weeks, and right now it's not clear if the votes are there to pass any plan. Even Stark admits his program is likely to be changed. Business groups are counting on that. They're concerned the new plan will complicate employer efforts to control costs.
There isn't much of an opportunity for employers to continue to do aggressive managed care the way they've been doing it and to be able to achieve savings that way.
Even as key parts of his own plan were being discarded in committee, the president today said he was optimistic about achieving health care reform this year.
I say to the naysayers and the pessimists that not quite so fast. I have seen a lot of endeavors in which I was involved over the last 15 years given up for dead.
Today's action shows health care reform is not dead on Capitol Hill, but all agree the legislative operations necessary to rescue this patient will be delicate, to say the least. Darren Gersh, NBR, Washington.
President Clinton plans to unveil a $13 billion plan to overhaul the nation's unemployment system tomorrow. Under his proposed Reemployment Act, the president will recommend extending jobless benefits to displaced workers training for new careers. His program would also combine all state and federal unemployment programs into one-stop career centers. The news comes just days before a meeting of G7 ministers in Detroit on worldwide unemployment issues. Well, the Whitewater controversy was again at the top of the White House agenda today. President Clinton said there were additional contacts between White House staffers and federal regulators about Whitewater, but he said they had nothing to do with the substance of any investigations. Meanwhile, Mr. Clinton named Lloyd Cutler to be White House counsel and helped find a way through the Whitewater minefield. The president called Cutler a man of seasoned judgment, impeccable credentials, and the highest ethical standards.
Productivity improved at the fastest pace in nearly 8 years at the end of 1993, and at the same time, labor costs fell at their fastest rate in 10 years. The Labor Department says the productivity of non-farm workers jumped a revised 6.1% in the fourth quarter, And for all of 1993, productivity rose 1.7%. Productivity has been trending higher recently because of corporate restructurings and layoffs.
Yesterday's rally on Wall Street, which lifted the Dow Industrial Average to a gain of almost 24 points, tried to carry over into today's opening. But after advancing only 2 points by 10 a.m., the Dow and the broader market began to falter as bond prices weakened. By 11:30 a.m., losing stocks took an 11-9 lead over gainers, and the industrial average was down 9.5 points. Prices stabilized at their midday levels and improved slightly in early afternoon as the industrial average cut its loss to only 5 1/3 points at 2 p.m. Despite further easing in bonds, stocks showed little movement for the rest of the day, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average closed down exactly 4.5 points at 3851.72. So we ended the day 8 points below the best level achieved during the session and up 11 points from the worst level. Trading volume moved up a bit from yesterday, about 13 million shares to almost 299 million, but more down volume than up volume by a fair margin. The transport index managed to gain 10 1/3 points, mostly due to strength in the rails, not the airlines. Utilities down 1.85 along with the weak bond market, and the closing tick barely bullish at plus 57. Standard & Poor's 500 fell just over a point, a 1 1/10 point loss on the S&P 100. Mid-cap 400 off exactly 1 point, and the Commodity Research Bureau index was up 0.05. New York Stock Exchange index losing 0.59, the value line off 0.35, and the broadly based Wilshire 5000 lost the better part of 11 points. Despite the positive report on fourth quarter productivity, which should help keep inflation in check, the bond market headed lower today, quickly wiping out yesterday's hard-fought gains, and things got worse in the afternoon when the Johnson Redbook reported early March retail sales rose a stronger than expected 0.7% over early February. Tax-free issues ended with quarter-point losses. Corporates fell 3/8 of a point. Long-term governments dropped 3/4 of a point on average, and that's exactly what happened to the 30-year Treasury, bringing the yield to maturity up to 6.87%. The Lehman Brothers long bond index was off just a little over 9 3/4 points, and Fed funds ended just where they did yesterday at 3.25%. Later, I'll show you where the action was on Wall Street today. Cassie?
The Clinton administration issued new guidelines today for banks and other lenders to put an end to discriminatory lending practices. The new bias rules clarify fair lending laws and spell out which practices will be judged illegal. The guidelines were drafted by bank regulators, the Justice Department, and the Department of Housing and Urban Development. HUD Secretary Henry Cisneros today said the rules are part of the administration's efforts to spur lending in low-income communities.
The cost of a stamp will go up to 32 cents if postal authorities have their way. The proposal is not a done deal yet, but it is being met with grudging acceptance by business and cheers from post office competitors. Jeff Yasteen explains.
The decision to raise rates is the first since 1991. Postal authorities say the increase from 29 cents to 32 cents will narrow a projected budget shortfall of more than $1.3 billion. It's due to a reorganization plan to reduce the payroll by 48,000 workers. But it resulted in large amounts of overtime pay for those remaining.
This rate proposal represents a fair, customer-responsive increase that we expect to last a couple of years and will help us build on the progress of the past 4. We made a promise, and we'll keep it.
The post office hopes to retain its bulk mail customers despite the increase, but industry representatives warned it could drive more businesses to use alternative private systems to send out second and third class mail.
As more and more businesses choose to move their mail out of the mail stream and into other media, it becomes increasingly difficult for the Postal Service to maintain itself on the volume that it's able to achieve.
Publishers Express is one such private carrier. Established in 1989 and jointly owned by a dozen major publishing concerns, it charges 10 to 15% less than the post office. Their business jumped from 1 million pieces of mail to 24 million after the 1991 increase.
And people that become aware that there is an alternative look to us and are thrilled that we exist. We don't have any of the myriad of regulations of the Postal Service. We're real easy to deal with. We're people. We talk to them one-on-one.
The Post Office's proposed rate increase must still be approved by the Independent Postal Rate Commission, which will hold hearings and rule on the request within 10 months. If approved, the new rates would take effect in early 1995. Jeff Yasteen, NBR, Miami.
Still ahead, Intel has been the computer industry's leader in developing powerful computer chips, but increased competition is forcing the company to take aggressive counteraction.
Metropolitan Life is facing a hefty penalty for alleged deceptive sales practices. The nation's largest life insurer says it expects to pay $96 million in fines and restitution to settle claims by the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. But an official with the Florida Department of Insurance says the cost could go higher if more valid claims surface. The regulators charged MetLife stood by while its agents misrepresented life insurance policies as retirement plans.
Entertainment giants Paramount and QVC both reported weak quarterly performances today. QVC had an 85% drop in its fourth quarter profits compared to a year ago and blames the loss on a charge of almost $19 million for its failed bid to buy Paramount. And Paramount says it lost $36.6 million in its latest quarter. In a separate announcement today, Paul Viacom said the FCC has officially approved its plan to take over Paramount.
Viacom stock today dropped a quarter of a point, ending at 32.5. Paramount rose 3/8 of a point to 46.5, and there was no change in QVC stock. Dow Jones Industrial Average, after gaining nearly 24 points yesterday, gave only about 4.5 of it back today. Not too bad around of profit-taking, and, of course, the weak bond market was part of the reason. About 9 stocks up for every 11 lower. Not too bad on advanced decline ratio. 85 new highs for the year versus 57 new lows. Topping the active list on 5 million shares, Telmex down 1.78. The Mexican Bolsa IPC index dropped 30.5 points, or 1.2% today. IBM moving up 2.5 points. The company plans to introduce on March 25th the most powerful notebook computer to date so far. Also, our market monitor, Frank Cochran, last Friday night on the program said IBM's a buy anywhere in the low 50s. SCE Corporation dropped 7/8 of a point. PepsiCo down 3/8 of a point, while GTE dropped 3/4. Bethlehem Steel down 1/8. EMC Corporation was up a full point. American Telephone lost 3/4. Eastman Kodak in there with a 3/8 point gain. 10th in volume. RJR Nabisco no change. Atlantic Richfield, or ARCO, was down 2.8 points after the Dean Witter brokerage cut 94 and 1995 earnings estimates. Burlington Northern, an example of the strong rail group, up 2 3/8 there. That helped the Dow Transports to a 10 1/3 point gain. Compaq Computer gained 2 1/4 points after the Kidder Peabody brokerage repeated an outperform rating. Delta Air down 1 point in the weak airline group. Dayton Hudson did well, up 2 1/2 points. Lehman Brothers brokerage upgraded it from neutral to outperform, sees the stock going into the low 80s. And General Motors closed at 62 after trading as high as 63 1/8 after Goldman Sachs brokerage added GM to its recommended list. National Data up 3 1/8 points. U.S. Healthcare has given the company a major contract to provide prescription verifications and other services. And a week ago Friday, our market monitor David Elias highly recommended National Data. On that same program, Elias recommended Verity Corporation at much lower levels. Today, up 4 1/4. Verity reported sharply higher fourth quarter earnings of 59 cents versus only 23 cents last year, well above street expectations. T-Square Medical up 7/8 of a point. It traded as high as 9 3/4. Bear Stearns tied the strength to an improved outlook for the company amidst this health care reform, and also because of Caremark's acquisition of Critical Care of America. American Medical Holdings rose 1 7/8. Rumors on the street circulating of a possible buyout of American Medical somewhere in the $30 a share range. MacArthur Glen Realty falling 2 1/4 points. A.G. Edwards brokerage downgraded it from buy to hold. And Pittston Minerals Group was down 1 3/8, but the company told us no comment. NASDAQ trading a loss of 2.93 in the composite index. Volume up 1.5 million shares from yesterday's pace. About 15 stocks up for every 16 down. 100 index fell 3 1/3 points. Intel topped the active list, losing a 0.5 point. Then Cisco down 3/8. Synoptics fell a 0.5. Lotus Development bucked that trend with a 1 5/8 point gain. 3Com down 5/8, 5th in volume. MCI Communications lost 1/8. Newbridge Network was a 1 point loser. DSC Communications fell 5/8. Microsoft down 1/4. And 10th in volume, Apple Computer down 7/8 of a point. Here's a huge percentage gainer. Sphinx Pharmaceuticals up 89%. It'll be taken over by Eli Lilly for $6 a share cash. West Newton Savings Bank rose 4 1/8 points. Shawmut National will acquire this company for $25 a share. Trimark Holdings down 2.5 points. The company says third quarter results will just be about break even, well below street estimates. The American Exchange Index down 1.38 today, and volume up 1.5 million shares from yesterday's pace. 269 issues closed with gains, 342 with losses. Charter Medical on 1.8 million shares topped the active list, moving up 1 1/4. Then Chicago Rivet and Machine up 2 5/8. Very nice gain there. Company in with sharply higher fourth quarter earnings, 98 cents up from last year's 48 cents, and sales in the period up 59%. Diversified Communication Industries dropping, that should be minus 46.3%, not plus, a big percentage loss. The company said it's going to have a year-end loss due to an accounting adjustment, but it didn't estimate the size of that loss. That's our Wall Street wrap-up, Cassie.
As Paul mentioned, IBM today introduced the first notebook-sized computer based on the PowerPC microprocessor chip. This $12,000 product will give financial analysts, engineers, and other users of workstation-class computers their first true portable. The PowerPC represents a challenge to Intel, which has a virtual monopoly on the market. Scott Gervey reports.
It is no coincidence that semiconductor giant Intel has been running television commercials pushing its Pentium processor. Next Monday, Apple Computer is expected to unveil a new line of its popular Macintosh computers. These computers will be the first Apples to use the new PowerPC processor, and experts say that is a challenge to Intel's dominance of the industry.
For the first time since the PC has been around, really, we have a competitive alternative to the 32-bit Intel processor, and that's the PowerPC chip. It has a lot of support, not only from Apple, but IBM and Motorola. So there's going to be a time in the next month or two where users are going to have to evaluate whether to stay with the x86 architecture of Intel or perhaps examine the PowerPC architecture of Apple and IBM.
Apple's new Macintoshes and IBM's plan to use the PowerPC in portable computers have many industry observers watching carefully, especially because IBM says PowerPC computers will be able to run the vast numbers of programs already written for computers with Intel processors. Intel is already taking extraordinary countermeasures. It is rushing new models of its Pentium processor to market and lowering prices. That is encouraging computer makers like Compaq to announce new systems using these processors. And Intel is expanding its own range of products to include complete systems and new technologies, like the recently announced ProShare conferencing system. There have been other challengers to Intel in the past, other processors that have never gotten beyond a niche market. For the PowerPC to succeed, it must do the same tasks as the Intel, and do them faster and cheaper. Scott Gervey, NBR, New York.
Coming up, the NBR Mutual Fund Report, and tonight's Moneyfile on how to lower your property taxes.
200,000 cars made by General Motors' Saturn Group could face a recall. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration said today it's investigating reports of an engine mount failure in Saturn models manufactured between 1992 and 1993. But Saturn says there's nothing wrong with the engine mounts. GM stock was up 3/8 today to close at 62.
The Federal Communications Commission announced today it has established rules for auctioning the rights to radio frequencies. For the first time ever, the government is requiring that companies will have to pay for the right to use the radio spectrum for any type of advanced wireless communication. Officials estimate the auction could bring in more than $10 billion.
Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation plans to help monitor whether customers are being adequately informed about the risks of mutual funds sold by banks. The FDIC says it will use undercover testers in a pilot program in banks to check on the process of selling funds. Officials say details of the program are still being worked out and there's no timetable for its start. The top-performing U.S. stock funds are in the spotlight tonight on our mutual fund report using data provided by Morningstar. For the last week, the #1 domestic equity fund was the Sierra Trust Growth Fund with a return of 4.2%. In second place was the Safeco Growth Fund with a return of 3.8% for the last 7 days. In third place, the Fairmont Fund with a return of 3.7% for the last week. And finally, in fourth place, the Smith Barney Shearson Special Equities A Fund with a return of 3.6% for the last week. And that's tonight's mutual fund report. Paul?
The IRS tax deadline is just a little over a month away, so that doesn't leave you much time to reduce your bill. But in tonight's Moneyfile, Eric Schurenberg, senior editor at Money Magazine, looks at how you can achieve savings in another area, property taxes.
If you've done your tax return already, you may be feeling a little worked up about the size of your tax bill. I'll sympathize. So here's a suggestion. Channel some of that tax-cutting fervor into lowering your property taxes. Unlike income taxes, property levies can be appealed. In fact, more than half the people who properly challenge their real estate taxes come away with cuts averaging about 10%. Try that with the IRS. To mount a successful appeal, you have to understand what you can dispute and what you can't. And you have to do your homework. What you can't change is the property tax rate, which is set by law. The point of your appeal has to be that your home's assessed value is too high. Municipalities calculate assessed value by multiplying your home's market value by the assessment ratio, or the percentage of market value subject to tax. To learn your assessment ratio, visit your assessor's office and ask. And while you're there, check the property record card that describes your house. If it contains an obvious error, say that you have more bathrooms than you really do, it's usually a simple matter to get your assessment lowered. If the only error is that your market value seems too high, ask the assessor or a real estate agent what comparable homes in your neighborhood have recently sold for, or hire an appraiser to evaluate your property. Then you typically can make an appointment with the assessor and state your case. If that doesn't work, take your appeal to your town's formal review board. Throughout the process, be polite and don't expect to get everything you ask for. But odds are, if you make your case convincingly, you'll have the novel experience of seeing a tax you pay actually go down. I'm Eric Schurenberg.
And that's it for this edition of NBR for Tuesday, March 8th. We want to remind you that this is the time of year your public television station seeks viewer support.
Support that makes programs like the Nightly Business Report possible.
I'm Cassie Seifert in New York. Thanks for joining us. Good night, Paul.
Good night, Cassie. I'm Paul Kangas in Miami, wishing all of you the best of goodbyes.
NBR is produced in association with Reuters, the world's largest electronic publisher, which provides NBR with news, market data, and communication services worldwide. And is made possible by A.G. Edwards, providing personalized financial services and investment advice to individuals and businesses. A.G. Edwards, a century-old tradition of service to investors. Franklin and Templeton Worldwide form the more than $110 billion Franklin Templeton Group, a global alliance of over 90 mutual funds and investment products, including U.S. government securities funds. Digital, an information technology company putting imagination to work. And by the financial support of viewers like you. The next generation will soon inherit $7 trillion. Whether you're planning to leave property behind or receive it, you need NBR's award-winning video, How to Plan Your Estate or Inheritance. To order by credit card, call 1-800-535-5864.
The Nightly Business Report is underwritten by GV Publications, locally owned publishers of the Texas Tech University Directory, as well as other university, college, and retirement directories throughout the country. located at 1409 19th Street, Suite 101.